The stars above the small human colony on the distant planets Zathera flickered like pinpricks of light, peaceful and unaware of the impending danger. In the warm glow of a quiet evening, Captain Elias Vaughn sat on the porch of his small house, his eyes fixed on the sky. His son, Liam, ran around the yard, laughing as he kicked a strange metallic object he had found while exploring the nearby hills. Elias smiled, watching his boy's boundless energy. Mara, Elias' wife, stood beside him, holding their infant daughter in her arms, her eyes also on Liam. The colony was remote, far from the usual space lanes of war and politics. They had settled here to escape the constant strife of the galaxy, hoping for peace and a simple life. But the peace was deceptive. Elias felt it in his bones. Something was coming, something ominous. It had been too quiet for too long. Without warning, the tranquility shattered. A deafening roar filled the air, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Elias' heart skipped a beat. He stood up quickly, his instincts screaming that this was no natural event. A blinding light filled the sky, a line of glowing, jagged shapes cutting across the heavens. The Tarvuk. The name sent a chill through his body. The ruthless aliens who had terrorized countless worlds, the ones who had destroyed entire civilizations without a second thought. They had come for humanity, just as they had come for countless others. Elias' military training kicked in immediately. He grabbed his blaster from the wall and ran to the edge of the porch, scanning the skies. The Xarvok fleet, cloaked and nearly invisible, had descended upon them. Their ships, massive and dark, loomed overhead like dark clouds, too many to count. No warning, no time to prepare, just sudden devastation. Maris screamed as the first blast hit the colony's power grid, sending a shockwave through the air. Elias ran to her, pulling her and their daughter inside, his mind racing. He knew the colony was defenseless. No shields, no defense against a force this advanced. But his first thought wasn't of the colony's fate, it was of his son. Liam, he shouted, rushing outside, his heart pounding in his chest. The boy had been so close to the glowing artifact, so close to the trees that lined the colony's perimeter. But as Elias sprinted across the yard, another explosion rocked the ground beneath him. The shockwave sent him tumbling, his head spinning. When he regained his senses, the world around him was chaos. The colony was burning. The sky was filled with smoke and fire, and the air smelled of scorched metal. People were running in all directions, some screaming, some silent as they tried to escape. The Xarvok were everywhere, their soldiers, tall, menacing creatures with advanced weapons, firing at anything that moved. Through the smoke, Elias saw the Tarvok soldiers dragging people from the burning buildings, shooting them point blank, their cold eyes showing no remorse. The soldiers were ruthless, efficient in their slaughter, but Elias wasn't focused on them. His eyes were locked on one thing: Liam. His son was nowhere to be seen. Elias called his name, his voice hoarse with panic, but the sound of gunfire drowned out his words. His heart raced, his blood turning cold as his mind painted horrific images of his son trapped in the chaos. The boy was fast, but no one could outrun the speed of the Xarvok assault. He ran toward the last place he had seen Liam, his feet pounding the dirt, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But it was too late. As he rounded the corner of a burning building, he saw two Xarvok soldiers holding Liam by the arms, dragging him through the dirt. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, his mouth open in a silent scream. "No!" Elias roared, charging at the soldiers with all the fury and rage he could muster. He fired his blaster, taking one of the soldiers down instantly. But the second soldier moved too quickly, a sharp mechanical arm shooting out to restrain him. Elias tried to fight back, but the soldier was stronger, faster. Before he could react, that Xarvok soldier raised its weapon, a gleaming, cruel-looking gun. The sound of the shot echoed in the air. Liam's body jerked violently, his eyes wide with terror as he collapsed into the dirt. Elias froze, his heart breaking as the life drained from his son's eyes. The boy he had loved, the child who had once laughed in his arms, was gone. The Sarvok didn't care. They had killed Liam with no hesitation, no remorse. He was just another casualty in their endless campaign of destruction. Time seemed to slow as Elias stared at his son's lifeless body, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The world around him blurred, the sound of the colony's destruction fading into the background. All that mattered in that moment was the burning rage inside him, the unquenchable thirst for vengeance that consumed him. He looked up at the Sarvok soldiers, standing tall and imposing, their cruel gazes fixed on him. Elias didn't care. He was no longer a soldier in the eyes of these invaders. He was a father, and a father would do anything to protect his child. His hand shook as he clenched his blaster, the weight of the weapon heavy in his grip. His heart pounded, but his mind was clear. The Sarvok had made a grave mistake. They had killed his son, and in doing so, they had unleashed something far worse than they could ever imagine. Elias would make them pay. His voice, low and filled with an icy fury, broke the silence. "You will regret this," he whispered, barely audible over the sounds of the burning colony. The soldiers didn't hear him, but he didn't care. He had made a promise, and he would see it through. The camera zoomed out as Elias stood over his son's body, his face a mask of grief and rage. The colony burned in the distance, the stars above watching as a war began, one that would see humanity rise from the ashes, and a Sarvok empire tremble before the wrath of a father who had nothing left to lose. The true battle had only just begun. Elias stood alone in the charred remains of his once peaceful colony. The air was thick with smoke, and the smell of burning metal lingered in his nostrils. His son, Liam, was gone. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Every part of him wanted to collapse, to fall to his knees, and scream into the blackened sky. But he didn't. He couldn't. There was no time for that now. The Sarvok had taken his son. They had killed him without a second thought, and they were still out there, slaughtering everyone in their path. The burning colony was a battlefield now, a place of death and destruction. Elias knew that if he stayed there any longer, he would become just another casualty, another body to add to the growing pile. But he couldn't leave, not without making them pay. He gripped his blaster tighter, feeling its weight in his hands like a promise. The Sarvok soldiers, towering and cold, moved methodically through the chaos, rounding up survivors and dragging them toward their ships. Elias could hear the screams of men and women, children, his people, being taken as prisoners or worse, slaughtered for sport. The sight of it, the sound of it, filled him with a fury that burned hotter than the flames surrounding him. He moved quickly, slipping through the shadows, avoiding the Sarvok patrols that scoured the area. His heart was pounding, his mind focused only on one thing: vengeance. He couldn't take on the entire invasion force alone, but he didn't need to. He had something the Sarvok didn't expect: the fury of a father who had lost everything. As Elias crouched behind a crumbled wall, he saw something that stopped him cold. One of the Sarvok soldiers, the largest of them all, was standing in the middle of the colony square. He was holding something in his massive, armored hands, something that made Elias' blood run cold. It was a small, lifeless body, Liam's body. The soldier tossed the boy's body onto the ground like it was nothing more than a piece of trash, and Elias felt a wave of rage wash over him. He fought to control it, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he pushed himself forward, staying low to the ground. Elias had no idea what the Sarvok had planned, but he knew this: they were not going to get away with this. The war that was supposed to be humanity's last stand had never come. The human race had been too divided, too scattered across the galaxy. It was supposed to be the end of their resistance, but Elias saw it differently now. The Sarvok had underestimated humanity. They thought they could break them with a single strike, but they were wrong. As Elias moved closer to the Sarvok soldier, he could hear the soft, mechanical hum of their cloaking devices, the subtle sound of their technology working to hide their movements. But Elias was ready. He had been trained for moments like this, where stealth and surprise were the only tools available. His hand tightened around the grip of his blaster, the cold metal offering a sense of purpose. In a swift motion, Elias pulled himself up from behind the wall and fired. The blast rang out, the energy bolt striking the Sarvok soldier in the chest. The force of the shot sent the massive creature stumbling backward, its heavy armor sparking as it fell. But it didn't go down without a fight. The other Sarvok soldiers nearby snapped to attention, their eyes glowing red beneath their helmets. They raised their weapons, aiming at Elias with deadly precision. Elias didn't hesitate. He dove to the side, rolling into cover behind a pile of debris. The air was filled with the sound of blaster fire, the crackling energy bolts zipping past him. He could feel the heat of the blasts as they grazed the air around him. But he kept moving, his body trained for moments like this. The Sarvok soldiers were relentless. They didn't stop. They didn't hesitate. But Elias wasn't about to give up. He had a reason to fight now, something more than just the survival of the colony. He had a purpose. He had to make them pay. As the battle raged on, Elias felt a strange sense of clarity. The war that had never been had now begun. The Sarvok had invaded, thinking they could conquer this world without resistance. They had thought humanity was weak, divided, easy to crush. But Elias knew better. Humanity might be broken, scattered, and vulnerable, but it wasn't gone. Not yet. And the Sarvok were about to find out just how wrong they were. In the chaos of the fight, Elias found himself surrounded by a handful of survivors, men and women who had managed to escape the first wave of the invasion. They were a mix of civilians and former soldiers, all of them scared and desperate. But as Elias turned to them, his voice steady, his eyes burning with determination, he saw something shift in their expressions. Fear was replaced with resolve. "We fight together," Elias said, his voice carrying across the small group. "We've lost everything today, but we haven't lost our will to fight. This is our home, and we will make them regret coming here." The survivors nodded, some of them still trembling, but all of them willing to take up arms. Elias knew they were no match for the power of the Sarvok army, but there was something they had that the invaders didn't. Heart. And heart could do things that technology and weapons couldn't. The battle continued as Elias and his ragtag group fought their way through the remains of the colony. Every corner turned, every firefight fought, brought them closer to the heart of the Sarvok invasion force. And with every step, Elias could feel the anger building inside him. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for his son, for the countless lives lost in this senseless attack. He was fighting for revenge, and he wasn't alone. The Sarvok would soon learn that humanity might have been silent for too long, but now they had awakened. The war that had never been was here, and it would be one the invaders would never forget. The deeper Elias and his small group pushed into the enemy's territory, the more the destruction around them grew. The colony, once filled with the hum of everyday life, was now a graveyard of twisted metal and burnt-out buildings. The air was thick with smoke, and the distant cries of those still trapped echoed in the night. Yet Elias didn't stop. His legs ached, his body screamed for rest, but he kept moving. Every step was another reminder of what the Sarvok had done, what they had taken. His group was small, just a handful of survivors. They were untrained, just ordinary people trying to survive, but Elias could see the fire in their eyes. They were fighting not just for survival, but for revenge. Each of them had lost someone, a friend, a family member, a child. They didn't know it yet, but they were becoming soldiers. They were becoming a force that Sarvok would have to reckon with. The heart of the Sarvok invasion force was still ahead. Elias knew that if they could get to it, they could strike a crippling blow. The Sarvok had set up a large command center at the center of the colony, heavily fortified and protected by layers of advanced technology. If they could destroy it, They could send a message that humanity wasn't going to roll over. Not anymore. But getting to it would be no easy task. The closer they got, the more they had to fight their way through. The Karvok weren't going to let them get that far without a fight. Their soldiers were everywhere, patrolling the streets, scanning for survivors. Elias's group was always on the move, slipping in and out of the shadows, using what little cover they could find. But the closer they got to the command center, the more they realized just how massive the Karvok presence was. They had reached a small bridge that led into the heart of the colony, where the command center lay. It was heavily guarded, with Karvok soldiers standing at every corner. Elias peered over the edge of the bridge, watching the soldiers patrol below, their massive forms silhouetted against the flickering lights of the command center. "We'll have to go around," Elias whispered to the group, his voice low but determined. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, trusting him, waiting for direction. They slipped back into the shadows, moving carefully along the edges of the bridge, looking for any weak spots in the Karvok defenses. Every step felt like a lifetime. Elias's heart was pounding in his chest, and his breath came in shallow bursts. But he kept his focus. He couldn't afford to be distracted, not now. After what felt like hours of moving carefully and silently, they reached an alleyway that led around the back of the command center. It was narrow, almost too tight for them to squeeze through, but it was their best chance. Elias signaled for the others to follow, and they moved in a line, staying close to the walls, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth beneath their boots. As they crept forward, Elias's mind raced. He couldn't help but think about what the Karvok had done to his son, how they had killed him, discarded him like he was nothing. It burned inside him, a fire that refused to die. He had promised himself that he would make them pay for this. He had promised himself that he would make them regret ever coming to Earth. The sound of a footstep broke him from his thoughts. Elias froze, his body tensing as he signaled for the group to stop. He waited, listening carefully. There it was again, a soft, steady footstep, the sound of a patrol coming their way. Elias held his breath, urging the others to stay still. The footsteps grew louder, closer. His heart was in his throat now. One wrong move, and they would be discovered. The patrol was only a few feet away. He could see the shadows of the soldiers through the crack in the alley, their glowing eyes scanning the darkness. The group pressed themselves against the walls, holding their breath, praying they wouldn't be noticed. Elias could feel the sweat trickling down his spine, his hands trembling as he gripped his blaster tighter. He could hear his heart pounding in his ears. But then, by some miracle, the patrol passed without noticing them. Elias let out a slow breath, releasing the tension in his body. They had made it. For now. They continued moving forward, keeping as quiet as possible. The alley grew darker the closer they got to the command center, and the air seemed to thicken with the presence of the Karvok. Every inch felt like it was being watched. Elias's instincts were on high alert. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him, the responsibility of keeping his group safe, of ensuring that they didn't fail. Finally, they'd reached the back of the command center. The building was massive, towering over them like a fortress. Its walls were made of blackened metal, reinforced with energy shields and armed turrets. It was clear that the Karvok had spared no expense in making sure this place was well protected. But Elias wasn't about to let that stop him. He motioned for the group to stay back as he approached the entrance. He could see the faint outline of a security panel on the wall, hidden just behind a pile of rubble. It was their only chance to get inside. Elias pulled a small device from his belt, a hacking tool, one of the few things he had left from the old resistance days. He had used it before, and he knew how to get it to work, even with the Karvok's advanced systems. With a few quick movements, Elias connected the device to the panel. And within moments, the door to the command center clicked open. It was a small victory, but it felt like a huge one. He signaled for the others to follow, and they slipped inside, their bodies tense, ready for whatever came next. The inside of the command center was cold and sterile, filled with strange machinery and flickering lights. It was a far cry from the warmth of the colony they had once known. Elias's mind was sharp, his senses alert. The heart of the beast was ahead, and he could feel it in his bones. He didn't know what he would find, but he knew one thing for sure, that Xarvok wouldn't expect a group like them. And that was exactly what would make all the difference. The air inside the command center felt heavy, like it was filled with electricity. The hum of the Xarvok machines echoed off the walls, a constant reminder of the power they held. Elias's group moved cautiously through the narrow hallways, the soft clink of their boots on the cold metal floors, the only sound breaking the eerie silence. They were deep inside now, and there was no turning back. The mission was simple: destroy the command center, disrupt the Xarvok's plans, and send them a message that humanity wasn't going to sit idly by. But as they pushed forward, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He signaled for the group to stop. Ahead, a large door loomed, sealed tight with a thick layer of energy shielding. It was the heart of the Xarvok operation, the place where their most dangerous weapons were stored and controlled. Elias knew that this was where the real battle would take place. The room beyond held the key to everything, their success or failure. With a silent nod, Elias motioned to the others to spread out, each of them taking a position near the door. The silence was suffocating. Elias could feel his pulse in his ears as he approached the energy shield. His fingers brushed against the small device in his hand, a thermal charge. It was a risky move, but it was the only way to break through. Elias glanced at his team, each one standing ready. They were no longer just survivors. They were fighters now, each with a purpose. He knew they were scared, but they were also determined. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about saving what was left of their home. "Get ready," Elias whispered, his voice barely audible. The others nodded, their eyes sharp, waiting for the signal. With a quick motion, Elias placed the thermal charge against the shield. The device whined softly, and for a moment, Elias felt his heart skip a beat. Then, with a violent explosion, the shield shattered. The door swung open with a heavy metallic groan. The team rushed in, weapons raised, prepared for whatever they would find. Inside was chaos. The room was vast, filled with rows upon rows of strange machines, flickering holograms, and strange symbols that Elias couldn't understand. The air smelled of burning metal and something far worse. It was clear that Xarvok weren't just using this place to plan their attack. They were using it as a staging ground for something even darker. At the center of the room stood a massive console, pulsing with energy. It was surrounded by a group of heavily armored Xarvok soldiers, their glowing eyes watching the newcomers with cold indifference. They didn't seem surprised. They had known they were coming. They had been waiting. Elias's breath caught in his throat. The soldiers were too many, their weapons too powerful. It was clear that they had anticipated this exact moment. The room felt like a death trap, and for a moment, Elias wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. But then he remembered why they were here. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for every life that Xarvok had taken. They were fighting for the future of humanity. "Move," Elias shouted, breaking the silence. He didn't wait to see if the others followed. He rushed forward, his gun raised, and fired at the closest Xarvok soldier. The blast hit its target, sending the alien soldier crashing to the ground in a spray of sparks. But there were too many more. The room erupted into chaos. Gunfire echoed through the chamber, the sound of weapons clashing and bodies hitting the floor ringing in Elias's ears. His team fought like wild animals, every move desperate, every strike fueled by a mixture of fear and rage. But the Xarvok were relentless. They fought with cold precision, their technology far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. Elias dodged a blast from one of the soldiers, narrowly avoiding the energy bolt that singed the air just inches from his face. He pushed forward, his fingers steady on the trigger as he fired again, taking down another soldier. His heart raced, and sweat dripped down his face. But he couldn't stop. Not now. The Sarvok soldiers were beginning to fall, but not without cost. Elias could hear the cries of his team, the sounds of men and women being struck down. He couldn't see them through the smoke and chaos, but he could feel the weight of each loss. Every person who fell was a piece of humanity that would never return. One of his soldiers, Bonner, was thrown to the ground by a massive Sarvok soldier. Elias's heart skipped a beat as he watched Bonner struggle to get back on his feet. The alien soldier raised its weapon, preparing to finish him off. Without thinking, Elias lunged forward, firing a shot that pierced the Sarvok soldier's chest. It fell to the ground with a loud crash, but Bonner was already too late. The damage had been done. Elias reached Bonner's side, his heart sinking as he saw the life drain from his eyes. Bonner had been one of the first to sign up, one of the few brave enough to fight back. And now he was gone. Tears burned Elias's eyes as he stood over Bonner's lifeless body. But there was no time to grieve. There was still a war to fight. The room was now filled with the sounds of destruction. The Sarvok soldiers were retreating, their numbers thinning as the human resistance fought back with everything they had. Elias's team was almost to the console, the heart of the Sarvok operation. They were so close. The end was within reach. Elias's mind raced as he turned to the console. The energy pulsing from it was nearly blinding, and he knew that if they could destroy it, they could stop the Sarvok once and for all. He didn't hesitate. He pressed the button on his device, setting the charge. It was going to be close. The Sarvok would know they had breached the heart of their operation. There was no way they wouldn't retaliate. The charge counted down, each second feeling like a lifetime. Elias grabbed one of the survivors, pulling them toward the exit. They had to get out of there before the explosion went off. "Move," he shouted. They ran, barely making it to the door as the charge reached zero. The explosion was deafening. The command center shook as the energy of the blast tore through the heart of the Sarvok operation. The walls buckled, the lights flickered, and the ground beneath them trembled. It was the beginning of the end. The Sarvok would never recover from this. But Elias knew the war was far from over. There would be more battles to fight, more lives to lose, but for the first time since this nightmare began, there was hope. The explosion reverberated through the heart of the Sarvok command center, sending shockwaves through the entire facility. Elias felt the tremor beneath his feet, and for a brief moment, it seemed like the world itself was coming apart. The blinding light of the blast was still fresh in his mind, but there was no time to think about it. They had done it. The Sarvok's command hub was destroyed. But as the dust began to settle, Elias knew the fight was far from over. The survivors of his team staggered to their feet, eyes wide with disbelief. The harsh reality of their situation was sinking in. The Sarvok had been dealt a severe blow, but there was no guarantee that this would end their invasion. The aliens were powerful, ruthless, and relentless. They wouldn't stop, not until they had wiped humanity off the face of the galaxy. Elias turned to face the others, his heart heavy with the weight of what they had just accomplished, and what they still had to do. The Sarvok soldiers who had once been so confident in their victory were now in disarray, retreating from the blast. But Elias could see the fear in their eyes. They hadn't expected the humans to strike back with such ferocity. They hadn't counted on the sheer will of the human spirit. "Move out," Elias shouted, his voice cutting through the smoke and dust. The team didn't hesitate. They were all feeling the weight of their fallen comrades, the ones who had given everything for this fight. But they couldn't afford to stop. Not now. They had to keep going, keep pushing forward. The journey through the Sarvok facility was a maze of twisted metal and collapsing walls. The destruction had crippled their infrastructure, but it was clear that the Sarvok weren't going to let this defeat go unpunished. Their forces were regrouping, and it wouldn't be long before they launched a counterattack. As Elias and his team moved deeper into the wreckage, they encountered pockets of resistance. Sarvok soldiers, now more desperate than ever, launched surprise attacks from behind cover, their energy weapons crackling through the air. But the humans were ready. They fought back with renewed determination, their tactics refined from the years of surviving under the oppressive rule of the aliens. The battle was fierce, but every Sarvok soldier that fell gave the humans a new sense of hope. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting back. Each victory, no matter how small, was a message to the Sarvok. Humanity was not done. They were not going to let their world burn without a fight. Elias's heart raced as he led his team through the crumbling hallways. He could see the fear in the faces of the survivors, but he could also see the spark of defiance. They weren't afraid anymore. They had found their strength. The humans were no longer the weak, helpless species that Sarvok had once thought them to be. They were warriors, and they had a fire that couldn't be extinguished. The battle raged on. Each corridor they crossed feeling like a new chapter in their fight for survival. But Elias knew that they couldn't keep up this pace forever. The Sarvok would eventually regroup, and when they did, they would bring everything they had to bear. Elias needed to find a way to hit them harder, to take the fight to their homeworld. But as they pushed forward, something unexpected happened. One of the soldiers, a young woman named Mira, ran ahead of the group, her eyes wild with excitement. Elias called out to her, but she didn't hear. She was too focused on the path ahead, her mind set on something she had just discovered. "Mira, wait!" Elias shouted, but it was too late. She had already turned the corner, disappearing into the smoke-filled distance. With a frustrated sigh, Elias motioned for the others to follow him. They couldn't afford to lose anyone else. As they rounded the corner, they found Mira standing in front of a massive control panel. It was still intact, despite the damage to the rest of the facility. Her hands were moving rapidly over the interface, her eyes scanning the glowing display. Elias approached cautiously, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. "What did you find?" Elias asked, his voice low. Mira didn't look up. "It's a communication hub," she said breathlessly. "This is how the Sarvok have been coordinating their forces. If we can take this out, we can cut off their communication with the rest of their fleet. It'll buy us time." Elias's heart skipped a beat. If they could destroy the hub, they could stop the Sarvok from coordinating their attack. It was the opening they needed, but they had to act fast. The longer they waited, the more likely the Sarvok would realize what was happening. Without hesitation, Elias gave the order. "Set the charge. We can't afford to miss this opportunity." The team quickly got to work, setting explosives around the base of the control panel. As they worked, Elias kept his eyes on the hallway, every sense alert to any sign of Sarvok reinforcements. The tension in the air was palpable, and every second felt like an eternity. Finally, the charges were set. Elias gave the signal, and Mira pushed the button to trigger the countdown. The seconds seemed to drag on, each one heavier than the last. Elias's heart pounded in his chest as the countdown hit 0. The explosion was deafening, and the entire facility shook. The control panel erupted in a flash of light, followed by a wave of heat that sent Elias and his team sprawling to the ground. The walls around them groaned as if the very structure of the facility was collapsing. The power went out, and the entire complex was plunged into darkness. Elias's ears rang, and his vision blurred. He struggled to his feet, disoriented but alive. The destruction was complete. The Sarvok's communication network was gone. They couldn't coordinate their forces anymore. Humanity had just struck a blow that would echo throughout the galaxy. But as Elias looked around, he knew this was only the beginning. They had won a battle, yes, but the war was far from over. The Sarvok would come again, and they would bring everything they had to crush humanity once and for all. But Elias also knew that they had something the Sarvok could never take away: hope. The humans had shown the galaxy that they were not a race to be underestimated. They had shown the Sarvok that no matter how powerful their technology, no matter how vast their armies, humanity would always rise again. And this time, humanity wasn't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. The aftermath of the battle had left the world around them unrecognizable. The once pristine base of the Xarvok, a sprawling fortress filled with advanced technology, lay in ruins. Smoke billowed into the sky, and the sound of distant explosions echoed through the desolate landscape. Elias stood at the center of it all, his heart heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. He had seen many battles in his time, but this one was different. This was not just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future. The destruction of the Xarvok command hub had bought humanity the time they desperately needed, but it had come at a cost. The human forces had suffered tremendous losses, and the emotional toll was starting to take its toll on Elias and the others. As the team regrouped in the ruined courtyard, Elias couldn't help but think of those they had lost. Bonner, the brave soldier who had always been at the front lines, had fallen in the thick of the battle. His sacrifice had saved countless lives, but it was a loss that would never be replaced. The grief was still raw, and Elias could see it in the eyes of his comrades. But there was no time to mourn. Not yet. They had to finish what they had started. "We've won a battle," Elias said, his voice steady but tired. "But this war isn't over. The Xarvok won't stop until they've wiped us out." Mira, the young woman who had discovered the communication hub, nodded solemnly. "We've done more than they thought we could," she said quietly. "We've shown them that we can fight back, that we're not going down without a fight." Elias looked around at the group. The faces of his soldiers were a mix of exhaustion, determination, and fear. They had given everything. And now, they were standing on the edge of something much bigger. There was no going back. They had to keep moving forward. They had to strike the Xarvok where it hurt the most. "Rest up," Elias commanded. "We'll head out at first light. We've still got work to do." As night fell, the camp was eerily quiet. The soldiers gathered around small fires, tending to their wounds and trying to find moments of peace amidst the chaos. Elias sat alone, staring into the flickering flames, his thoughts consumed by the mission ahead. His mind kept returning to Bonner and the others who had fallen alongside him. They had all believed in the cause. They had all fought for the same thing: survival. But there was something more to it than that. The humans were fighting not just to stay alive, but for a future. For the children, for the next generation. It was a fight for hope. And as long as there was hope, there was a chance. Elias was snapped from his thoughts when Mira approached him, her face illuminated by the firelight. She looked tired but determined, her eyes unwavering. "You've been quiet," she said, sitting down beside him. "Thinking about the future." Elias nodded, not sure what to say. His thoughts had been a whirlwind of uncertainty, and he didn't want to burden her with the weight of it all. "Yeah," he finally said. "I keep wondering if it's worth it. All the sacrifices, all the lives lost. Sometimes I wonder if we can really win this thing." Mira looked at him, her expression softening. "We've already won," she said quietly. "We've shown the Xarvok that they can't just push us around. They thought we were weak. But we've proved them wrong. We've shown them that we'll fight for every inch of our land, for our families, for our future." Elias sighed, his gaze lingering on the fire. "It's not enough, Mira. We need more than just a few victories. We need to end this. We need to strike at the heart of the Xarvok." Mira reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We will. Together." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Elias knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but with people like Mira by his side, there was a chance. Together, they could finish what they had started. The next day, the team prepared to move out once again. They had a long journey ahead of them, and that Xarvok wouldn't give up easily. But the humans had something the aliens didn't: resolve. Elias had seen it in the eyes of every soldier, every civilian who had stood their ground against the invaders. The battle had only just begun. The humans made their way through the charred remains of the Karvok facility, heading toward their next objective. The feeling of victory still hung in the air, but Elias couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that lingered in the back of his mind. The Karvok were ruthless, and they would stop at nothing to achieve their goal of galactic domination. As they advanced, the landscape around them grew darker. The once bustling facility was now a graveyard of broken machines and destroyed technology. The silence was unsettling, broken only by the occasional crackle of fire or the sound of boots crunching on the debris beneath them. Elias led the group, his mind focused on the task at hand. They needed to reach the Karvok's command center, the heart of their operations. It was there that they would strike the final blow. But they knew the odds were stacked against them. The Karvok were already regrouping, preparing for their retaliation. But the humans had something the Karvok didn't: unity. Elias felt the weight of that responsibility with every step. The soldiers who marched beside him were no longer just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for everyone who had ever suffered at the hands of the aliens. They were fighting for a future where humanity could thrive, free from fear and oppression. It was this sense of purpose that kept them going, even as the reality of the war set in. They had already paid a heavy price. But in that moment, Elias knew that the greatest sacrifice had yet to come. The battle for humanity's survival had only just begun, and they would not stop until they had secured their place in the galaxy. As they approached the Karvok command center, the weight of their journey pressed down on them. The team was tired, battered, but ready. There was no turning back now. They had come too far, lost too much, and sacrificed too much to let the Karvok win. This would be their final stand. They would either rise to the occasion or fall with honor, knowing that they had given everything for a cause that was greater than themselves. Elias looked out over the horizon, the final remnants of the Karvok's reign within their grasp. They had one last chance to take it all, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. The fight for humanity's future was about to reach its climax. The time for sacrifice was upon them, and Elias was ready to do whatever it took to see this war through to the end.